Greetings, folks. My name is Dustin Cormier. Welcome to How to Rock Astrology. Now we are going to be getting into our first chapter, Chapter 1. In this case, being the origins of Jyotish, written by none other than Robert Svodoba and Hart. This is a reading of Light on Life, the Astrology of India. So we went through the introduction, and now we're finally getting into Chapter 1. And in this chapter, our authors delve into the origins of Jyotish. Does that mean historically, or does that mean eternally? They get a little bit of both in this derivation. Chapter 1, subheading, oral versus written. No authoritative history of Jyotish is ever likely to be written, for its historical origins are now thoroughly lost in the shadows of antiquity. Some maintain that Jyotish is a divine dispensation, one of God's gifts to humankind, an eternal item transmitted only to some places in space and time for whatever reason. Jyotish then is maintained to be a divine dispensation revealed to us by India's sages. Others yet see Jyotish as a hybrid of borrowing from other civilizations, a cunning cultural theft. We, the authors, view Jyotish as a developing body of knowledge, an original and indigenous astronomy and astrology which, after its inspired origins, has absorbed and integrated insights from other cultures. That's solid. Some authors use the conspicuous absence of written Jyotish prior to the Greek conquest of parts of northern India to conclude that Jyotish was essentially borrowed. Contemporary researchers, being generally suspicious of oral transmissions of knowledge, look for a culture's written records, believing that oral history deteriorates into myths and legends. Yet, the possibility also exists that mythic and legendary knowledge was used by the ancients to transfer esoteric knowledge from one generation to the next. Those of us who believe the written word to be inherently superior to the spoken word should consider the following, spoken by Thaumas, the god-king of Egypt, to the god Thoth, who was congratulating himself on having invented the alphabet. This invention, Thoth says, will produce forgetfulness in the minds of those who learn to use it, because they will not practice their memory. Their trust in writing, produced by external characters, which are no part of themselves, will discourage the use of their own memory within them. The specific which you have discovered is an aid not only to memory, but to reminiscence. And you give your disciples not truth, but only the semblance of truth. It's quoted in De Santanolana, page 348. So, the written word was... The written word was an afterthought, not an ideal for many civilizations. In India, traditional authorities assert that the custodians of sacred knowledge recorded it in written form only when its transmission became endangered because fit disciples could no longer be found. Traditional training in India's classical traditions, Shastras, to this day relies on oral transmission via memorization, prosodic recitation, and discussion. Until recently, all students were trained to develop powerful memories, and in modern India, servants still perform prodigious feats of recall, effortlessly reciting chapter after chapter of the works which embody their various classical traditions, including Jyotish. We of the 20th century, who believe in the linear progress of civilization, possess an inborn bias for silent reading, an evolutionary development which was more recent than writing. We in the West, we just read silently to ourselves without resuscitating it, without that type of memory condensation. We belong to a culture which worships the visual, and this makes it difficult for us to conceive that knowledge was once transmitted orally from generation to generation with accuracy and that writing was once regarded as a crutch of little intrinsic value. It is possible that not only were our ancestors' minds comparable to our own, they may have even had superior minds to ours in certain ways. Most of us never fully develop our capacity to memorize. How then can we know how or what our forebears thought? Psychedelic stuff when you really think about it. It's a wonderful way to put that. Just goes to show that the minds of those in yesteryear are not necessarily dimmed by their lacking our technology and quantity of information, as opposed to quality of intellect, which they might have had because they were not necessarily blinded or distracted by the forms of knowledge or by the desire to ingest quantities of knowledge as opposed to commanding and cultivating a quality of intellect. So, next chapter heading reads Veda, Vedanga, Vidya. Oral traditions, which still abound in India, are remnants of the time when entire civilizations were organized orally. The first texts to be taught, heard, and learnt in India were the Vedas, the sacred books of the Aryan peoples. Most non-westernized Indians believe that the foundation of their culture was not created by ordinary humans, but was cognized as Veda, sacred knowledge, by the ancient seers known as rishis. The four Vedas, which are generally acknowledged to be the source texts of what is usually known as Hinduism, are collections of hymns or sacred songs whose deep significance lies less in the literal meaning of their words than in their symbolic meaning, their rhythm and melody, and the personal power of their reciter. The printed page can only transmit a small fraction of the Veda, and an audio or video recording only a bit more. But even those who learn to recite the Veda perfectly may never gain access to its deep knowledge, which can be transmitted, again, only from one initiated living being to another, not unlike the Western tradition of magic and occultism. The Vedas themselves may be considered living beings. Those who open themselves to these entities by being initiated into their study by a guru who has served as their receptacle for many years become filled with this deep knowledge. Unfortunately, even though a few Vedic traditions survive in India, there is substantial doubt that anyone living today fully knows the deep knowledge contained within the Vedas. For the keys to understanding their esoteric import started being lost well before the Christian era. A lack of fit disciples dooms a tradition as surely as a lack of children dooms a family or a species. Because even at their birth, the Vedas were fully comprehensible only to the rishis. The seers who divinely cognized them developed 6 auxiliary disciplines called vedangas, or limbs of the Veda. Veda, and then anga is the limb. Vedanga. These 6 vedangas must be studied before one can attempt to comprehend the Vedas themselves. They are vyakarana, it's grammar. Chandas is meter. Shiksha is intonation. Nirukta is etymology, the root meanings of words. Kalpa, which is ritual. And Jyotish, which is astronomy and astrology. When the Veda is personified as a living being, Vyakarana is regarded as the face, Chandas as the legs, Shiksha as the breath, Nirukta as the ears, Kalpa as the hands, and Jyotish as the eyes, the eye of the Veda. Each Vedanga is a living being who can be obtained only through a guru. These beings, and others like them, which have sprouted from the Vedic corpus, are often generically termed vidyas, a word which is derived from the same root as the word Veda. Think video, right? Visual eye transmission. Every vidya is a goddess who must be worshipped in order that you and she may develop a personal relationship so profound that she can possess you. Jyotish is the Jyotir vidya, the lore of light. A vidya which can be had only from the Jyotishis, because Jyotish is the study of all facets of the lords of light, the sun, the moon, the planets, and the stars, being those lords of light. Now next chapter heading is the eternal faith. The Vedas, which have existed in their present form unchanged for thousands of years, represent an even older tradition, which evolved centuries earlier. As time went by, and humans became less able to be possessed by the Vedic hymns, as the fit between the humans and the hymns deteriorated, essentially, new forms of sacred knowledge sprang into being from Vedic roots. The philosophical and religious ideals introduced into Indian culture by the Vedas have been amply fertilized by a wide variety of influences, both local and imported, and the immense mass of spiritual, ethical, and religious vegetation which has sprung from these Vedic roots has come to be known popularly as Hinduism, although that word has some ill-intended etymological historical roots. Although Jyotish is sometimes called Hindu astrology, this term is misleadingly sectarian, for it is also practiced by Buddhists, Sikhs, Jains, Muslims, and Christians in many other countries other than India. I consider myself to have deep Christian roots, although I don't admit it in my own culture because Christianity's got a bad rap for a lot of more political reasons than truly religious ones, but I digress. I would call myself a Christian-rooted religionist who certainly takes upon Jyotish in my as part of my living experience. Jyotish is Hindu astrology in the sense that it is an outgrowth of Hinduism, which is sometimes referred to as the Sanatana Dharma, the eternal faith. The Sanatana Dharma, Sanatana Dharma is eternal because it sprouts vigorous new growth wherever one of the saints or seers, who are its inspired founders, receives new inspiration from the one absolute reality. The eternal faith has grown over millennia into a broad spectrum of religious attitudes, philosophies, sects, deities, rituals, and conceptions of supreme beingness, many of which have only one thing in common: their acknowledgement of reality's ultimate oneness. The seers of Jyotish, inspired by the Vidya, have similarly developed many varied methods with which to examine and describe reality. And Jyotish is the aggregate of their inspired compositions. A religion's structure codifies inspired knowledge, and its innovators ensure that this structure remains an accurate reflection of reality. Throughout Indian history, many sects and religio-political movements have claimed that they alone have preserved true tradition or possess the new revelation. Such movements have generally contributed to the eternal faith's vitality. But when they disparage or suppress the beliefs of others, they lose that broadness of vision, which is the eternal faith's most valuable attribute, the Sanatana Dharma's most valuable attribute. Jyotish has likewise been enhanced by those Jyotishis who, inspired by the Vidya, have codified new principles of interpretation. However, Jyotishis who assert that their style alone is appropriate for this day and age paradoxically prevent the Vidya from inspiring them. For the Vidya flowers only according to her own sweet will. That's such a lovely way to put it. We have to be open vessels to the true Vidya, which will adapt, which will change, which will manifest and transmute itself across the faces of cultures and trading outposts of understanding, which is what I'm trying to do with these videos. Because ultimately, what is trying to come through us and what we're trying to put ourselves in alignment with is the organic reception of that which is the eternal truth of the Vidya, who flowers only according to her own sweet, esoteric will. Next heading is Myth and Observation. Although today's Vidya is the same Vidya who possessed and inspired the Jyotishis of the Vedic era, no one today knows exactly what sort of astrology was practiced in Vedic times. Just as medieval calculation methods differ significantly from those in use in modern India, Vedic calculations may have also been different. This is likely to be true of interpretational principles, too, which is one of the many reasons why the term Vedic astrology is an unfortunate translation for the word Jyotish. Vedic astrology almost certainly relied much more on observational astronomy than it did on calculation. I should note here that if you're interested in this particular dimension of things, check out Vic Dakara's work. He's really an advocate for this true sense of like Veda as a historical arc and what's the eye of the Veda, the Jyotir Vidya is, and where it has stepped through this culture that we call Veda and Vedanta, Vedanga, etc. So, Vedic astrology almost certainly relied much more on observational astronomy than it did on calculation, which was the sky. What is the sky looking like from our position? Simple positional data were augmented by evaluation of qualities such as the observation that a full moon, whose light had a bluish tinge to it, exerted a different influence on the earth from one whose tinge was reddish or blackish or purely white. This is an example of what I mean, just looking right out there and seeing what the sky looks like. Almost omen, like the consciousness of omens are involved. Not in a superstitious way, but in the sense that when you see something in the sky, it's just very direct in the old sense. Now, today, those who speak of, say, Venus in Scorpio, for example, rarely consider that the passage of Venus through the mouth of the scorpion may have suggested to ancient sky watchers a far different interpretation than did Venus passing through the scorpion's tail. Or consider the nakshatra, the Vedic the 27 lunar mansions. That's what the nakshatras are. So they're saying, let's consider the nakshatra Rohini, which appears in the constellation Taurus and is said to represent a wain or a cart. I should say that this is according to their Ayanamsha, which is something that we're going to have to get into at some point. But some people would say that Rohini is not in Taurus, but I digress. We'll get into the specifics of what's being said here later on. For now, he's making a point. Rohini is the lunar mansion of Rohini and among the stars. Rohini represents a certain star formation, and it represents a wain or a cart. So many Sanskrit texts, even those which have little to do with Jyotish, report that when Saturn passes not around but through the wain of Rohini, the cart of Rohini, immense famine and other disasters will result. That's an observation of Saturn going through that particular point in the sky. These are all things that are far removed from what we would consider modern astrology. One of the Sanskrit names for Venus is Shukra, which means white. And Venus is indeed a bright white orb, the brightest object in the night sky after the moon. Venus is so bright that you can see it even during daylight, if you know exactly where to look. Another meaning of Shukra is semen. Just as Venus is the brightest, meaning most potent, planet, semen is the most potent or the brightest substance in the male body. People tend to be at their most amorous when Venus is shining brightly in the sky, either in the early part of the night, just after going to bed, or early in the morning, just after waking up. Note that a man's testosterone is at its highest daily level around 4 a.m. From the mythic angle, the deity who plays the role of Venus in the cosmic drama of Jyotish, enjoys a capability which no other celestial possesses: the power to bring the dead back to life. Venus, the planet in the narrative of Vedic astrology and Jyotish, Venus was awarded this ability after he was swallowed by Lord Shiva and spent 100 divine years in his belly. Venus dies and is reborn in many cultures, including the Sumerian, where her name is Inanna, and also in the Mayan, Quetzalcoatl, the plumed sky serpent representing Venus. Should you plot Venus's risings and settings, you would find that he creates a serpent in the sky, the death and rebirth serpent, which the Tantric tradition calls the Kundalini Shakti. This is one reason why Venus is one significator of Tantric ritual in a horoscope. There's much wonderful esoteric knowledge being displayed there. This death and rebirth myth is a product of observational astronomy. Venus, which has a 584-day cycle of visibility, appears as both the morning star and the evening star. In between these periods of visibility, each of which lasts about 263 days, come with two periods of invisibility, during which Venus is conjunct with the sun, or it disappears into view due to being too close to the sun. When Venus, as the evening star, moves towards its solar conjunction, it sets in the sky. It appears lower and lower each night until that fateful night when it fails to appear at all, swallowed up by the sun, who may be identified here with Lord Shiva. Both the sun and Shiva represent the universal soul. When, after 2 weeks or sometimes less of invisibility, Venus reappears, he becomes the bright morning star, the soul's herald, for another 263 days. Then, again, he sinks into conjunction, this time for about 7 weeks, until finally he reemerges as the evening star. When some clever observer of the heavens noted that the period of these two stars is almost precisely the same length as the average human pregnancy, it's roughly 265 days, enough time for a slain hero to die and be reborn, all the elements of the death and rebirth motif were in place and ready to be mythified in terms of Venus, the death and rebirth cycle. Because of these many changes, Venus is also regarded as an inconstant, unstable planet, as are Mercury and the Moon, the two other very changeable planets. Saturn, on the other hand, is the slowest planet, since he is furthest from the Sun, and many of his principal qualities derive from this distance. Being furthest away, he is the most isolated, the coldest, the darkest in complexion, and the gloomiest, meaning darkest of mind. Termed the lame one for being so slow, Saturn tends to produce delayed, limited results because he displays these qualities wherever he sits in a horoscope. So, we've got one last little bit before we go into our next part. This little bit here is called Teaching Tales. It's our next little subtitle in our reading. One way in which deep knowledge is imparted to students of Jyotish is through observations and interpretations like these, which are stored in planetary stories and myths. So like the following ones here. Part of the sadhana, the spiritual path of Jyotish, is to learn these myths and their cosmological import. When well heard and digested, these stories helped to integrate Jyotish's tenets into the pupil's consciousness, which makes the model of reality, which is Jyotish, become vividly real and solid. There's no doubt that the best way to learn Jyotish is to hear teaching stories at the feet of your guru. But because the tales themselves are also alive, they can speak softly to those who listen to them mindfully, even if they have no guru handy to amplify them. The story of how the 12 rashis, or constellations, the signs of the zodiac, got their lords, the planets who rule them, is a good example of such a teaching tale. This is an important one, and I highly recommend you digest this, because this is, again, for all Western or, if you're someone interested in Vedic astrology and you're getting lost in all the many little bits of data, but you're losing the comprehensive picture of it all. This is a good story for seeing it all in the great psychedelic context of the evolving human energy field. So, I digress. So, this is the story of how the 12 signs got their lords, meaning the dispositors, the planet who rules them. The story conveys the order of the rulerships of the constellations in such a way that is not quickly forgotten. It relates the planets to their internal correlates. It summarizes the personalities of the planets. And it includes some astrological knowledge, all in a package that is ear-friendly and is easier on the mind than mere memorization. So far as we know, this particular legend appears nowhere in classical literature. It has been preserved solely by being told from one generation to the next. This is some of the juicy stuff that you can find in this particular book. Now here's the story. In the beginning were sun and moon, the king and queen of heaven. Absolute monarchs of all they surveyed, they ruled from the constellations of Leo and Cancer, respectfully. When Mercury saw that these two owned everything, he decided to ask, since Mercury rules communication, for some land in the zodiac for himself. The sun, being naturally magnanimous, said, "All right, you may take possession of Virgo, the constellation that is next to mine." Now, Mercury is well known as a dual planet, a master of duplicity who speaks with a forked tongue. He found it so easy to get land from the sun that he waited until night. Mercury rules both day and night. And then told Moon, the queen of the night, O queen, the sun has given me a plot. Are you going to be outdone?" Now, sun is the soul, and moon is the emotional mind. Mind is insecure, knowing that it has no independent light of its own, that it only reflects the soul. Since it is insecure, mind is always trying to aggrandize itself. And so it often tries to duplicate processes which are part of the life of the soul. This, for example, is the reason why the mind frequently tries to convince itself that it might live forever. So, Moon replied to Mercury, "All right, you take Gemini, the plot next to mine." In this way, Mercury, the thinking mind, gained possession of Virgo and Gemini. Now Venus, desire, saw what Mercury, the thinking mind, had done and made the same request. A Sun, who was very honest and would not gift away the same space twice, said, "I've promised the space next to me to Mercury, but you may have the next space," which was Libra. Then Venus repeated his request to the Moon, obtaining Taurus thereby. Then, seeing what Venus, desire, had done, Mars, action, did the same, obtaining Scorpio and Aries from the Sun and Moon, respectively. Notice that Aries is to the left of Taurus and Scorpio is to the right of Libra. It's a very important story when it comes to understanding these all to be positions of the chakras. Something for you to consider. Sun and Moon, Virgo and Gemini, Aries and Libra and Taurus, solar plexus, Aries and Scorpio, sacral chakra, Pisces and Sagittarius, root chakra, Capricorn and Aquarius. So, Mars did the same, obtaining Scorpio and Aries to the left and right. And requests from Jupiter, being wisdom, gained him Sagittarius and Pisces. And finally, even Saturn got the news. Saturn, who is slow to catch on and always the last to know. Saturn, the principle of renunciation, got what was left on both sides, which was Capricorn and Aquarius. Table 1 shows the final position of the planets as rulers of the constellations of the zodiac. This is, of course, an important table. Let's see if we can get it nice and tight. It's a very psychedelic picture here. We can see that there is a logic to these planets having this duality situation. This order reflects the distances from the various planets to the Sun. Mercury is the closest planet, followed in order by Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and finally Saturn. Earth is not counted because she is our frame of reference. The column led by the Sun's constellation follows the natural direction of the constellational order, while that led by the Moon follows the reverse direction. Very psychedelic. So there's the Sun and the Moon. Mercury would be the next distant, and then there's Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. An incredible picture of the intricate spider web of astronomical synchronicity involved in human consciousness and therefore in astrology. Now, the real beauty of this story is that this order also reflects the evolution of embodied consciousness, which arises from the soul and is experienced first in the emotional mind. Soul and emotional mind being a yin and a yang that's sort of one. Sixth chakra. As objective thought gradually develops, so does the thinking mind, the neck, the throat chakra, Virgo and Gemini, Mercury. The more the mind thinks, the more the mind desires. Venus, Taurus, Libra, heart chakra. Desires lead to action in order to actualize those desires. Solar plexus, third chakra, Aries and Scorpio, Mars. And from action comes wisdom, as one learns the beneficial and detrimental results of good and bad actions and feels them at that gut guilt level. That's the sacral chakra, Jupiter, Sagittarius, and Pisces. When wisdom finally matures, renunciation becomes inevitable because you become satisfied with what is bestowed upon you by nature. You are happy with whatever remains, in Sanskrit, the uchasishta. And that which remains is, of course, Saturn, that which you essentially have been all this time. All the other fascinations were just pulling you away from what is essentially the clear bottom line truth of existence and what you are doing as a karmic mule for your own transmutation into spiritual illumination. The same life drama, I guess I should say Saturn, root chakra, basic security, fundamental openness to further chakra orientations. Saturn, Capricorn, Aquarius, first chakra. The same life dramas that are acted out on Earth appear symbolized in the skies, as above, so below. Something that I'm sure many people listening have heard before. So that is a nice little breakdown of Jyotish, talking about it at the metaphysical end as well as the historical end of how Jyotish has developed in history over time. So we're going to end this episode today for now, since we're like 40 minutes in. I'm going to try to keep these episodes to generally. Catch us on the next episode. We're going to be talking about Jyotish's limbs. It's going to be a little bit more sort of orientation, shall we say. You know how you go to school. When you go to school, orientation is like, what are we doing here for the year type thing. That's sort of what they're doing in this book right now. And in the next page, it's going to give the many different types of Jyotish. And eventually, we're also going to get into the styles of Jyotish. So, thank you for joining with me so far. Check out the next episode. The next episode will be should be, if I do it this way, should be the completing of Chapter 1 of Light on Life, an introduction to the Astrology of India. Catch you guys on the next one, folks. Thanks for watching. If you've been enjoying this, feel free to like, subscribe, ask me a question, leave me a comment, and keep your eyes peeled because we always got more stuff coming along, folks. Thanks again. I'm Dustin Cormier for How to Rock Astrology. See you on the next one.